Ansari added, this war should have been over a long time ago. Palestinian negotiators told Dropsite they remain cautiously optimistic a deal will be signed, though they point to previous rounds of ceasefire negotiations that saw Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insert new demands at the 11th hour, something that we covered extensively. Okay? Actually, our foreign policy wasn't bad tour right now, which is, of course, laughable because, as you guys know, there is a side deal that has taken place where Donald Trump is going to get all the glory of potentially facilitating a ceasefire deal. And it's not because he actually applied any sort of pressure to Hamas. Lo and behold, shockingly enough, it was actually because they had to apply pressure to Israel. So obviously, we're going to be covering that a little bit more extensively. But before we get to that, obviously, that reality kind of puts a stain on the Joe Biden and Antony Blinken media tour. But let's take a look at what happened.
We strengthened America's robust regime on Iran and delivered on President Biden's commitment.
You will forever be known as Bloody Blinken, Secretary of You have the blood of hundreds of thousands of innocent people on your hands. We have spent
Thank you. I respect your views. Please allow me to share mine. Thank you.
Appeal to your humanity in front of your house. We've written you letters. We've held car rallies. The blood of innocent civilians, of children, is on your hands. We will not forget. We will not forget. We will hold you accountable. We will hold you accountable. Bloody Blinken.
These are the goals that I've worked to advance over a dozen trips to the region since October 7th.
It's so good because it's like they know they're gonna get kicked out, so they're just like waiting one at a time. Anytime he starts talking about it, he's like, "Shame on you."
Oh, thousands and thousands and thousands. How do you break American law? How do you do all that and then sit here and tell these people, civilized people, that you are doing what? Kill your policy for the Middle East. Kill, and kill, and kill. Just what the Israelis say. You're a brutal war criminal. We sat in front of your house for a year. You have no compassion. You are a monster.
Is that hard to achieve? Yes. Peace in the region always has been.
For over 450 days, Israel has committed genocide against the Palestinian people. We have sent over $25 billion to Israel in the past year. That's $70 of all of our money. $70 that we are using to send bombs and genocide. Blinken, you lied on May 10th to Congress. You lied. ProPublica looked it up. May 10th.
All right.
If these
and in the heels of Antony Blinken doing a failed media tour talking about how sick he is as a statesman, we are at a new stage in the Gaza ceasefire deal. And I will say this much, this is more hopeful than ever before. And it's not because of Trump glaze or anything like that. But, I mean, this is being reported on by the whose reporting I definitely trust. Jeremy says, the prospect for an agreement to halt Israel's war against the Palestinians in Gaza is at its most promising point in over a year. Sources close to Hamas's negotiating team tell Dropsite News that on Monday, Hamas agreed to the framework text, including an exchange of captives and hostages, and had not requested any significant changes or amendments. But the devil, as always, is in the details. Many of the obstacles have been ironed out, said Majid al-Ansari, the spokesperson for Qatar's foreign ministry, in a press conference in Doha, where the negotiations are taking place. There are many pending issues, part of which is related to the implementation. We believe we have minimized many of the disagreements between both parties, and current discussions are focused on the final details. And where is it? Yeah. We are closest than at any other time in the past to a deal, Ansari added. This war should have been over a long time ago. Palestinian negotiators told Dropsite they remain cautiously optimistic a deal will be signed, though they point to previous rounds of ceasefire negotiations that saw Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insert new demands at the 11th hour, something that we covered extensively. Okay? As you know, something that we talked about quite a bit is the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu added erroneous clauses, poison pill amendments, and provisions into the ceasefire negotiation with the hopes of extending it, to the aftermath of the election to, I guess, reconsider how he will move forward, depending on whether it's Donald Trump who won or Joe Biden who won. That's the situation that we're facing. But it seems as though the American administration is not all that powerless. It turns out that they're so powerful that the incoming president could before he's even in power, the incoming president, who was the president before Joe Biden, is capable of forcing America's most important ally, most powerful ally, most moral nation in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East, to actually finally come to terms with an agreement that has been on the table since the 2nd of July, an agreement that was previously brought forth by Hamas all the way back in May. So how does that happen? Is Donald Trump an incredible statesman? Is he a fantastic diplomat? Is he Mr. Art of the Deal, Art of the Steal? Is that why he was capable of doing this? Wasn't Joe Biden Mr. Foreign Policy? I thought he was a foreign policy expert without a PhD. Devoid of a PhD, but he's just that good. Turns out Donald Trump is better. Is that the case? Or did Donald Trump actually successfully apply Yahoo, knowing full well the cards that America holds in this process? The same cards that Joe Biden refused to play, despite the fact that he had played those cards all the way back in 2021 when he stopped Israel's further incursion into Gaza. I will forever repeat that America holds all the cards. America says jump, Israel says how high, not vice versa. Okay? There's reporting by Israeli media claiming that Trump promised to allow Netanyahu to violate the Gaza ceasefire and resume the war after signing a deal. I would link, but I can't. It was reported by Ynet. Still trying to remain hopeful, but cautiously optimistic. Change title. What is the title? Oh, Bernie interview right now. Okay, calm down. Nobody reads the title anyway. That's so funny when people go, change the title. And it's like, dog, on my title, it said, I was interviewing Bernie Sanders at 2 p.m. Pacific multiple times. And people kept asking over and over again, when are you interviewing Bernie Sanders? Just click because I'm live and move on with your life, chatter. Calm down now. And also, while you're at it, subscribe for $6 or for free with Twitch Prime if you want to continue supporting this broadcast. This is going to be a banger year, as you guys have seen so far. 14 days in, we've had incredible interviews, more on the ground reporting, actual real journalism, okay, on the ground journalism, and the like. Or don't subscribe if you don't want to. It's all good. I'm not going to serve ads regardless, but Sex Havard, thank you for the 10 gifted. But remember, Twitch Prime is free. Yams, thank you for the 10 gifted subs as well. Yeah. What is different this time, however, is that President-elect Donald Trump has made very clear his demands that a deal be reached before his inauguration on January 20th. The terms of the deal being negotiated are largely consistent with what was on the table last May when outgoing President Joe Biden first announced it. Biden allowed Netanyahu to steamroll him for months, rewarding Israel with billions of dollars in arms transfers of political support after rejecting that ceasefire deal. Since that time, tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians have been killed and maimed, and an unknown number of Israeli captives killed, either by their captors or Israeli strikes. All the while, the administration and its backers repeatedly assured voters in the U.S. that Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris were working tirelessly around the clock to achieve a ceasefire deal, an erroneous claim elevated by the likes of even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That was probably one of the lowest points. The fact that Trump emerged as the decisive player in pushing a potential ceasefire forward is evidence that Biden never used the full powers available to a sitting U.S. president to seal the deal in the summer. While Trump has publicly repeated his threat that he will unleash hell on Hamas if the Israeli hostages are not freed, his pressure has not been solely focused on Hamas. Trump and his aides have made clear to Netanyahu that the president-elect expects Israel to comply with his demands too. What's really interesting is, considering that it wasn't Hamas that was spoiling the ceasefire negotiations, and it was always Israel that was spoiling the ceasefire negotiations, the only difference between Donald Trump and Joseph Robinette Brandon is who they chose to apply pressure to at all. And the party that Trump is seemingly applying pressure to is Israel. I understand there's been a handshake and they're getting it finished, and maybe by the end of the week, Trump told Newsmax Monday night. For sure, part of Trump's motivation involves humiliating Biden, claiming victory for freeing the hostages. I think what Trump is trying to do is clean house and start a new slate. and I'm sure that he has a lot of ideas about how he's going to reward Israel and Netanyahu once this is done, said Sami Al-Arian, a prominent Palestinian analyst and a director of the Center of Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zaim University. You can never trust what Netanyahu says or does, but I think new factor here is that the new Trump administration does not want this headache, which would distract from higher priorities on Trump's agenda. For weeks, Trump's new Middle East special envoy, real estate tycoon Steve Witkoff, has participated directly in the negotiations. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported last weekend Witkoff forced Netanyahu, despite objections from the prime minister's aides. Witkoff's blunt reaction took them by surprise. He explained to them in salty English that Shabbat was of no interest to him. His message was, okay, that's crazy. That is crazy. Witkoff has forced Israel to, that right there is old school gangster style that is ultimately very disrespectful but deliberate. That is absolutely something that you do, because Witkoff is Jewish, I think, isn't he? So he knows the importance of Shabbat. Okay, he knows what message that sends to not only the entire nation state of Israel, but that message that sends to, Benjamin Netanyahu. Apologies. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is Saturday. It's a day of rest where some Jewish people, Orthodox Jews and some conservative Jews as well, do not work from sun up to sundown. Jewish Sabbath, it's a Saturday. So, and there's a lot of rules around it. There's a lot of rules around it. Like you can hire a Shabbos goy, but like you're not supposed to work at all. And by that, I mean, you're not supposed to operate any electronic equipment. You can't even change the channel on your TV. This is why Jewish hospitals in the New York metropolitan area will literally have elevators that stop at every single floor on Saturdays, because you're not allowed to, get in a car or carry keys or even press the button on an elevator. So in any case, it's pretty significant. And this is a deliberate method of disrespect from the Trump team. Witkoff is openly saying, I don't give a shit about your religion. I don't care about like what your day of rest looks like. You only do that not because time is of the essence. You do that specifically to undermine the person you're talking to. It sounds something that Trump would probably do. Has Hassan given time for the Bernie interview? Yes, you missed it. The proposed ceasefire deal. According to the leaked draft of the three-phase agreement framework, Hamas will release 33 Israelis held in Gaza, some alive, some deceased. These will be women, children under the age of 19, elderly people, and injured or sick civilians. In turn, Israel will release 30 Palestinian children or minors or women. For the 5 female Israeli soldiers being held, the text says 50 Palestinian prisoners will be freed. The exchange will begin with the release of the 3 Israelis and then continue in small groups over the course of 7 weeks. Among the Palestinians to be freed would be 47 people who were rearrested by Israel following a prisoner exchange in 2011. Israel will also release all women and children it has detained since October 7, 2023. During this period, there would be a temporary cessation of military operations by both sides. Throughout this first phase of the potential ceasefire, Israeli military forces will gradually withdraw from various positions in Gaza, and forcibly displaced Palestinians would be permitted to return to their neighborhoods. This was a major part of the deal initially that Benjamin Netanyahu refused to come to terms with. If still standing, their homes. From the first day, significant amounts of humanitarian aid, relief trucks, and fuel will enter Gaza, 600 trucks daily, including fuel trucks. This includes fuel for electricity generation, trade, rubble removal, and operating hospitals, clinics, and bakeries, the draft states. After 42 days, the second phase would begin with the release of the Israeli soldiers held in Gaza. This is almost identical to the initial drafted proposal that the UN voted on that Biden presented as Israel's own proposal, by the way. It is also identical, damn near identical to the initial proposal that Hamas had suggested, that Hamas said that they would agree to, that Israel then claimed was manipulated in the negotiation process and refused to claim. That came even many months before then. Hamas had agreed to all of these. Hamas had agreed to this exact same proposal in July. Hamas had suggested a proposal very similar to this months prior to July. Joe Biden came out and stated this exact same proposal with almost the same details in July and claimed it was Israel's proposal. And then Israel refused to sign off on its own proposal, holding the Netzarim corridor with a permanent military occupation and also the Philadelphia corridor that borders the Gaza Strip with Egypt. He refused to move from phase 1 to phase 2 in the negotiations. He said, we're not doing that. We're going to have a permanent military apparatus in the Philadelphia corridor, the southernmost point of the Gaza Strip. All of a sudden, it's no longer a point of consideration, apparently. A permanent ceasefire will take effect before further prisoner exchanges, and Israeli forces will fully withdraw from Gaza. The final phase, 7 weeks later, calls for a comprehensive reconstruction plan overseen by Egypt, Qatar, and the United Nations. During this period, the bodies of deceased captives would be exchanged. Over the summer, Netanyahu quashed a deal that President Joe Biden had hailed as a decisive breakthrough. On July 2nd, Hamas officially informed its mediators it agreed to a U.S. amendment draft that included the last-minute changes from Israel, but the U.S. joined Israel in falsely accusing Hamas of rejecting the deal. Yes. Netanyahu then intensified Israel's attacks in Gaza, repeatedly added new terms to the framework, and assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political leader and lead negotiator in Tehran, on Iranian soil. Okay? A double Monty, if you will, of escalation. Among the new demands put forward by Netanyahu were the rights to continue occupying the Philadelphia corridor along the border in Egypt, to maintain control of the Rafah border crossing, and to keep Israeli troops in central Gaza along the Netzarim axis. There, IDF forces would have established checkpoints to search Palestinians seeking to return to their homes in northern Gaza. Wrong. It was the American signatory at the UN under Biden administration that declined the deal. No, that came after. The current draft of the agreement calls for a withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza and does not demand the dismantling of Hamas or its exclusion from Palestinian politics, nor does it permit the open-ended presence of Israeli occupation forces in Gaza. Netanyahu had proclaimed he was fighting an existential war that would cease until total victory was achieved. On paper, this deal represents a major rebuke of some of Netanyahu's stated goals. Netanyahu, by not having his total victory, has been defeated, which by extension means that the resistance, because of its steadfastness, and until the last moment, it's been a war of attrition, said Al-Arian. The Qassam brigades and the Al-Quds force, the armed wings of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, have been able to inflict major tactical defeats in terms of the soldiers, in terms of the plans of trying to have an occupation without cost. Netanyahu hasn't been able to have them defeated or surrender. That's not happening, which means that Israel cannot claim a total victory as Netanyahu has been promising. It's a mixed victory for Netanyahu. Now, it's not only a mixed victory for Netanyahu, it's actually a major defeat for Netanyahu in terms of the more radical elements within his governing coalition and his war cabinet. You have Israel's far-right interior minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, calling on his fellow cabinet members and finance minister Bezalel Smotrich to join him in threatening to quit the government if Netanyahu moves forward with this deal. We succeeded in the past year through our political power in preventing this deal from going through, Ben-Gvir said. Since then, however, additional parties have joined the government which are supporting the deal, and we are no longer the decisive factor. Smotrich called the potential deal a catastrophe, posting on X, "This is the time to continue with all of our might to occupy and cleanse the entire strip, to finally take control of humanitarian aid from Hamas and open the gates of hell on Gaza until Hamas surrenders completely and all the hostages are returned." He's saying like we should, continue the full-scale genocide, ethnically cleanse the Palestinian strip. He is Gaza Strip. He has openly stated these desires numerous times. As Dropsite's very own Ryan Grimm also reports, the fact that Ben-Gvir can admit to having blocked hostage deals many, many times, and this isn't the end of his politics career, says a lot about the current politics of Israel. What is this article that the readers added context to? Who will be released first, and what will the idea of President Gaza Strip look like? The deal outline is being sorted out. Oh, they're doing a context note to what Itamar Ben-Gvir is saying. It includes the release of hundreds of murderous terrorists from prisons. This is not a hard choice that must be made to return the kidnapped. It's a conscious choice at the cost of the lives of many other Israeli citizens. Over the past year, through our political power, we have managed to prevent this deal from coming to fruition time after time. That is crazy. So why, after taking $100 million from Adelson, would Trump force Israel to not do what they are already in the process of doing? I'll tell you why. One, this is a major victory for Donald Trump, and that's important, okay? That's really, really important. Two, this way, you don't let them permanently annex North Gaza, but you give a moment, you allow Israel to basically lick its wounds, rearm, and redeploy potentially down the line, and engage in a permanent occupation of the West Bank. Permanent annexation of the West Bank. Israel currently, with its military personnel and its internal conflict, is incredibly weak. Its economy is weak. Its politics are weak. There's a lot of crisis happening in Israel. So they're not militarily ready, I think, to permanently annex the West Bank. This is what Miriam Adelson wants. This is what Miriam Adelson openly communicated to Donald Trump and gave $100 million to Donald Trump to do. That's what I think is going on. Okay, that's what I think is happening. Now, I don't know, because there are some self-inflicted wounds in the process of a permanent occupation and permanent annexation of the West Bank. The wounds would be that you would all but completely finalize the apartheid structure, and it would make it completely indefensible. Now, one might say, well, Hassan, Israel has conducted a genocide for the past year, and it doesn't matter if it's consistently indefensible. Like Western allies have repeatedly attacked Israel for doing this. They still kept doing it because as long as America has their back, they will be able to do whatever, and they've learned a very terrible lesson here, that they will get away with it. And to that I say true. Having said that, however, a permanent annexation of the West Bank basically comes with the recognition that it's just a singular solitary state of Israel, which accelerates, in my opinion, the demise of the Israeli apartheid in its entirety, not dissimilar to South African apartheid. That's what I think, but who knows? That is one of the reasons why I think Israel might not permanently annex the West Bank, is what I'm saying, rather than keep stressing the areas that are still under the control of Palestinians and keep doing military incursions into areas that are under the control of Palestinians, as they've done consistently over this past year. And this way, they will be able to do that a little bit better, I guess. So it's interesting that I mentioned that this was going to happen, by the way. Like exactly what has happened so far, I said was going to happen with Trump dealing with Israel if he wins. And now it's unfolding in front of our eyes. So once again, if you are taking a victory lap to own the libs, I guess, to say, because the liberals were taking victory laps saying Trump is going to be far more bloody and far more deadly to the Palestinians. Yeah, I hope you enjoy all of your Gazan relatives getting murdered under Trump or whatever, because that's what liberals are saying, because they're disgusting cretins. But then there are also leftists, or even not leftists, but like Arab voters that voted for Donald Trump, saying like, well, he delivered on his promise to us. I would simply state that, once again, I do not think Trump's ambitions in Israel are going to be all that different from Joe Biden. Foreign policy is uniparty. Foreign policy only goes in one direction, and that is more bloodshed and more war. And Republicans have a tendency to dramatically increase said bloodshed. Okay? So while I am hoping that this will lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities, I don't know how permanent that those cessation of hostilities will actually be, if that makes sense. Okay? That's all I'm saying. It might seem like it is cast aside as Israel gets to regroup. It might seem like it's the war has passed, the genocide is done, and everyone gets to recover and try to rebuild. Having said that, however, I think the only rebuilding and recovery that will happen in this process will be Israel rebuilding its military capabilities as fast as possible in an effort to increase the pressure upon the Palestinians in the territories that it occupies currently, illegally enforcing its sovereignty over Palestinians, and will, I think, continue on the pathway of destruction. Do you think Israel will start again after next presidential election, especially with Democrats elected? Yeah. Jabri dropped his Tyler Hitler Vera video. Okay, we'll get to that later today. Calm down now. In advance of signing an agreement, according to Israeli media reports, Netanyahu would need approval from a security cabinet, but not a full vote in the Knesset, Israel's parliament. Israel's Ynet reported that Netanyahu has enough support to make the deal. Among the technical issues still being discussed among mediators Tuesday was the exact positioning of Israeli forces in a new buffer zone inside of Gaza. Netanyahu and his aides have emphasized this element in their campaign to sell the deal domestically by implying that they could resume the war at any moment with forces remaining in strike position until all hostages, dead or alive, are returned to Israel. Despite the waves the deal is making in Israel, Netanyahu will almost certainly claim it as a victory in his larger agenda in the Middle East, extending from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria and Iran. Many of Netanyahu's major achievements occurred after he rejected the Biden deal last summer. the killing of Hamas leaders Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh, as well as the wiping out of the upper echelons of Hezbollah in Lebanon, including its leader Hassan Nasrallah. Netanyahu is also taking credit for enabling regime change in Syria and degrading Iran's regional influence. Trump and his advisors have not revealed any details on what they may have offered Netanyahu in return for his acquiescence to the Gaza deal. Trump has portrayed himself as the most pro-Israel president in history and has stacked his incoming administration with unbridled pro-Israel nominees, some of whom have said there is no such thing as a Palestinian or the West Bank. In his first term, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner touted the Abraham Accords, a major push towards normalization with Saudi Arabia, and a return to the effort would have far-reaching implications not just for the Palestinian cause, but also for power balance in the Middle East. Trump and Netanyahu share a desire to see regime change in Iran, or at a minimum, to target its nuclear facilities and its capabilities. Israel could annex more Palestinian territory and further expand illegal settlements in the West Bank, as well as more land in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, which Trump officially declared Israeli territory during his first term in office. Trump is very ardent and very Zionist and very supportive of the Israeli enterprise, the Israeli project. But I think he wants to help them in different ways rather than achieve what they call total victory over something that he could see is not attainable in the near future, said Al-Arian. Netanyahu could go back to his old tricks, and again, he could make up some excuse to resume his war so that he can stay more in power and basically shuffle the deck again, hoping that Trump would be exhausted and let him do what he wants. Al-Arian also believes that if the Gaza war remains stalled, Netanyahu will intensify its focus on the West Bank. That's what I think as well. Since October 7th attacks, Israel's way smaller-scale war in the West Bank engaged in limited ground invasions and mass arrests. There will possibly be an end to the Gaza war, but there will be now another war in the West Bank, Al-Arian said. It may not be on the same scale, but it would be as vicious from the settlers, from the Netanyahu government. That is in line with what my assessment is as well. But on that note, let's see what Channel 4 News has to say while I go pee.
Really are to be the final days and hours of this war. In Gaza, they still follow a familiar, merciless course. 9 people killed in an Israeli airstrike overnight on a family home in southern Khan Yunis.
They're children. My niece was 18 months old. My sister was 7 months pregnant. Her sister-in-law just gave birth 2 weeks ago. They didn't even name the baby.
Nearby, other family members mourning at a hospital morgue. Allah grieving for his brother.
We were saying, thank God, there will be a ceasefire and we'll all go back to Rafah, but he wasn't destined to return.
The emerging ceasefire that came too late for this family, seemingly little changed from the one that's been on the table for months. From the talks in Qatar, confirmation that the main obstacles had been overcome. Questions of implementation remained to be agreed. The catalyst, the impending inauguration of President Trump.
They have been involved fully in the talks, as I said, from the Biden administration and the incoming administration. They were working in tandem together here in Doha and beyond in the region to make sure that the deal happens.
Last week, Trump threatened hell to pay if a deal weren't reached before he took office. More emerging now about the role of his Mideast envoy, Steve Witkoff, who reportedly insisted on meeting the Israeli Prime Minister during the Jewish Sabbath on Saturday, exacting concessions and heading back to the talks. A copy of the agreement obtained by the Associated Press outlines a first 6-week phase during which 33 Israeli hostages, women, children, elderly and injured, would be exchanged for hundreds of Palestinians in Israeli prisons. Among them, 5 Israeli female soldiers would be swapped for 250 Palestinian prisoners, 150 of them on life sentences. Palestinian civilians would be allowed to return to homes in the north.
Palestine has voted for Hamas, a terrorist regime that attacked his neighbor. Aw, you clapped him before he could get his thought out? Man, there's no free speech in here. Hold on, let me read the rest of it. And killed thousands of people. What other country would stand for that? Certainly not America. That's really interesting. Now understand that Israel voted for Likud, a terrorist regime that attacked its neighbor and has consistently occupied its neighboring state as a settler colonial enterprise, constantly dominating the lives of more than 10 million people. What group of individuals would stand for that? Certainly not America. Also, Palestinians have historically gotten refuge in bordering Muslim countries, but no longer given previous incidents. So how strange. So how to manage that situation? Also, Israelis came into the region from the Western world. What are you saying? This is literally carbon copy Nazi arguments. People who want to defend Israel routinely refuse to recognize that, considering that Zionism as an ideology is inherently a fascist one built around an ethno-religious supremacist ideology that constantly seeks to destroy its opponents, those who are lesser, those who are of a different religious background, don't realize that this is the exact same argument that Nazis made about Jewish people. And neo-Nazis to this day still make the same exact argument about Jewish people. They say, oh, Jews have been kicked out of every country that they've been in. I wonder why. Think about that. Do you have no shame? No critical thinking skills? No way to understand the situation that you are quite literally doing the neo-Nazi argument when you talk about Palestinians? Yeah, Arabs should just go to a different Arab country, right? Like, I don't get it. That makes no sense to me. It is the exact same argument.
If still habitable, and aid would be increased to 600 trucks a day. Israel would withdraw troops from areas such as the Netzarim corridor, which it had wanted to retain to prevent weapon transfer to the north. It would, though, keep troops in the Philadelphia corridor on the Egyptian border. In parallel, negotiations would continue ahead of Phase 2, which would see mainly male soldier hostages exchanged for more Palestinian prisoners and a full Israeli military withdrawal, including from the Egyptian border, something Benjamin Netanyahu had long resisted. For Israeli hostage families, fresh from a meeting with the Prime Minister, the lack of full agreement on that second phase causing concern.
We are demanding from Prime Minister Netanyahu, from Qatar, from President-elect Trump to agree upon all the stages of negotiation and get all the hostages back.
Israel's Prime Minister also under pressure from an Israeli right that had expected very different things of a Trump presidency. His far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir threatening to walk out of the coalition of what he called a deal made for Hamas. The third and final stage of that deal would see a massive reconstruction effort in Gaza. The US Secretary of State saying President Trump's team...
Yeah, imagine if the Germans invaded the US claiming it's their territory and they told all the Americans to just move to Canada because you both speak English. Yep.
...would take over work already started.
For many months, we've been working intensively with our partners to develop a detailed post-conflict plan that would allow Israel to fully withdraw from Gaza, prevent Hamas from filling back in, and provide for Gaza's governance, security, and reconstruction.
But here too there's huge uncertainty. Hamas, one party to a deal designed eventually to replace it as Gaza's governing entity. For all the skepticism about where this deal may end, one thing goes unquestioned by Israel's hostage families and Gaza's civilians alike. It must at least begin.
Well, in a moment we'll hear the view of the Palestinians. But first I spoke earlier to Israeli hostage negotiator Gershom Baskin. I started by asking what has led to the deal being potentially struck now.
The big difference between what we've seen over the past months and right now is January 20th, when the big T enters the White House once again. And all of them are putting the screws on Prime Minister Netanyahu, on the Qataris and the Egyptians, who are putting the screws on Hamas. And all this pressure is working because we're really, really, really close to an agreement.
But hang on a minute. President Biden has at least told us that he's been putting the screws on the Israeli Prime Minister consistently over the last year and a half or so, or since October the 7th, and it hasn't worked. So is Trump's thumbscrew much more powerful than Biden's?
Well, it could also be that Biden wasn't really putting the screws on Israel, because we know at the same time that he said he's drawing red lines and Israel better do this and that, he was sending more and more weapons and more money to Israel. So there was no real pressure felt by Prime Minister Netanyahu from President Biden. And when there's a Democratic administration and a prime minister like Netanyahu in office, he can always go to his Republican friends. Now, Netanyahu has no one to go to complain about the president putting pressure on Israel when it's the president himself from the Republican Party.
And in the interim, waiting for this thing to get implemented, another 10,000 people have been killed.
Another 10,000 people have been killed. A lot of Israeli soldiers have been killed. A lot more suffering has taken place on both sides of the border, mainly in the Gaza Strip. It's really horrible.
Okay. If this deal now goes ahead, does that mean the end of the Netanyahu government?
No, I don't think so. Netanyahu has a majority in his government to pull off the deal. Even if the far extreme right wing opposes it, he will still be in power. The danger to Netanyahu's coalition or to his government is that When the war is over, the call for new elections will grow louder, and the demanding of the Israeli public for a national commission of inquiry to determine how Israel failed to protect itself on October 7th, what led to that, and the dysfunctional nature of the Israeli government since then will all come to a head.
But could he escape defeat in new elections?
Well, all the polls since October 7th of last year show that Netanyahu cannot win another election. The size of his coalition or the ability to form a new government with a majority in the parliament is not there since October 7th.
Finally, and briefly, if you don't mind, 6 months before the Oslo Accords were signed on the South Lawn of the White House, Bill Clinton was president, Yasser Arafat was there, Yitzhak Rabin. You know, the rest is history, as they say. But no one thought at that stage it was possible, and then it was. Do you think something similar could happen on the South Lawn of the Trump White House?
Precisely. And it's not only that example you're giving. We can talk about the Berlin Wall. We can talk about Nelson Mandela. We can talk about Syria and Bashar al-Assad, that no one predicted the day before the Syrian regime fell that it would fall. So, yes, I think we're actually closer to a possible Israeli-Palestinian peace deal than anyone can even imagine.
Despite all the horror of the last year?
Because of all the horror of the last year. There are still 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinian Arabs between the river and the sea. They're not going anywhere, and this has to be the last war. We can't keep doing this.
Gershon Baskin, thank you very much, as ever.
Thank you.
Well, I'm now joined by Mustafa Barghouti, the General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative and member of the Palestine Liberation Organization Central Council. Mustafa, it's good to have you back on the program. Let me start with that note of optimism from Gershon Baskin there. You know, although this has been the darkest hour for so many, he thinks that this, because of the horrors of the last year, something positive might come from it, both for the Palestinians and for the Israelis. Do you agree?
I agree that something good could happen. But
peace with the Nazis, brother. It don't matter if you are. Think about it like this: during the Holocaust, if at any given moment, if the Nazis were like, "All right, we've taken enough of a punishment, we're just gonna stop killing all of the people in our death camps," do you think the people in the death camps would be like, "No, hold on, keep fighting all the way through"? No, of course not. Yeah, for the Palestinians that are suffering, for the innocent Palestinians are being ruthlessly slaughtered, this is a good thing. Think about what has happened thus far. Yeah, yesterday Dropstar reported on how the PA is slaughtering West Bank Palestinians under the guise of eliminating Iran-backed outlaws in a bid to show the Americans that they can be trusted to run stuff. The report mentioned how the PA requested $600 million in arms to do so. It seems that Israel is using them as the initial force to weaken West Bank militants and displace and murder the residents prior to the annexation. Yeah, I mean, this is an escalation of what the PA has done as a mechanism of the Israeli security apparatus in perpetuity. This is the reason why the Palestinian Authority is literally the second least popular institution in the region, according to Palestinians. Number one being Israel, of course. Number two being, followed closely, the Palestinian Authority.
That is conditioned by a different American position in general, and the different position of the Western countries. If these countries tell Israel enough is enough, and you have to end your occupation.
Genuine question: what are Arabic countries around Palestine doing to help? Why is the Western world seemingly louder? Right-wingers around me bring this up, and I don't know how to reply properly. I mean, ask them who the most powerful military is. The most powerful country on the planet backs Israel unconditionally. The most powerful country on the planet uses Israel as an extension of its imperialist ambitions in the region, and therefore has cut out security contracts with every single vassal state in the region. Okay? Many of these other nations would not stand in the way that they currently do without consistent American dollars. Many of these countries would not have the necessary security apparatus to be able to stop their population from overthrowing them. Okay? The countries that do not actually play ball with American empire end up getting destroyed, even if they also aren't exactly great people either. They're not like Bashar al-Assad is a great example of this. Okay, Bashar al-Assad is a ruthless autocrat, terrible tyrant. Okay, not a good guy, and also incredibly incompetent on top of everything else. Like, not only was he ruthless, but he was also incredibly incompetent. That much is a 100% certainty. Okay. But Bashar al-Assad also, in all of that incompetence, allowed Iran to utilize Syria as an important part of the logistical hub in weapons transfers to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Okay. So he had to go. Do you understand? Like, even if you're not fully on board with Palestinian emancipation, even if you marginally represent a threat, to Israel, and by the way, there is perhaps no greater demonstration that Assad was not that large of a threat to Israel ultimately, because he had a freaking navy, right? And he had, I say, because he no longer has any sort of military equipment, because Israel blew it all up after he was overthrown. Okay, there goes another shitty Syria take. Okay, dude, sure, you're right. That's a bad Syria take. Anyway, regardless of his incompetence, he didn't demonstrate enough of a threat to Israel that they actually actively undermined his military. Okay, except for the logistical hubs that existed within Syria that were being that were, you know, manufacturing weapons or transferring weapons into Hezbollah, into Lebanon, through Syria. Okay? HTS is better than Bashar. The PLO is a joke. Atheist fucks. The U.S. funds the Egyptian military. Without that, they will go bankrupt, and another Arab Spring will happen. Lord, forgive me. I'm about to get real Islamophobic on some of you. I swear to God. I'm about to go back to my old Turkish roots. Yes, everyone in Syria is a jihadist now, huh? Is that what I said? Is that what I said? I didn't even... You brought it up. You have no idea what you're talking about. Just stay quiet. Hashtag Islam. I'm about to go back. I'm about to go back to my Turkish Reddit atheist roots. My man said former Al-Qaeda leader is like not that bad, bro. What's next? You're gonna tell me Al-Qaeda are doing are jihadists? Like, come on, bro. He reformed. I never said everyone in Syria is a jihadist or a hyper militant Sunni Islamist or whatever, or a Salafist. I never said that at all. I have long maintained the position that the people of Syria, we'll see what happens, but most likely the people of Syria will suffer as a consequence of whoever controls Syria, regardless. When you look at the way that these nations have been carved out anyway, they are deliberately designed to constantly create sectarian infighting. That's what happens when you are victim of colonial ambition. And the nation states that are designed for you are designed specifically with consistent destabilization in mind. He is a Turkish puppet. Me? If I was a Turkish puppet, Türk mü lan bu? Evet, ben Türk'üm. But if I was a Turkish puppet, I would be loving the moves. What are you talking about? Turkey is the one that made out like a bandit in this process. They eliminated Assad. They cooked Russia in the process. They got virtually everything they wanted out of the Syria deal. Now they're pushing actively to remove any sort of Kurdish political power from the process. Anyway, that person didn't say I was a Turkish puppet. He was just, yeah. Turkey killed it. Recep Tayyip Erdogan absolutely destroyed in that process. He won so big because it always pays well to be America's lapdog, okay? So the former RDF soldiers, are also all of them terrorists or not? No, I live in the United States of America. I grew up in Turkey, okay? These are two countries where they have obviously they both individually have massive militaries. I understand what the military is a jobs program at the end of the day. In Turkey, there's mandatory conscription as well. And while both of these militaries do an endless amount of bloodshed, countless amounts of displacement and the like, I ultimately do not fault people for the actions that they've committed or the actions that they've taken, as long as they can actually reform, unlike HTS. I'm not talking about HTS when I say the fake reform so that they're more appealing to Western interests as they dominate the country. I'm simply talking about people who take on this position, take this role, and it's the same for the IDF as well. Okay, as long as after your experience that you understand that it was unacceptable, wrong, and you work to atone, then you're good. Great. When I say the Israeli occupying force is a terrorist entity, what I mean by that is that the institution in and of itself is doing terrorism, and the same goes for American military members as well. This is a consistent position I've held in perpetuity. Okay. It's partially because I understand where people's starting position is. I understand where people come from. I understand how people make these decisions. America doesn't even have mandatory conscription, and yet I still understand that, like, for many people, the poverty draft is very real. So for upward social mobility and a chance to get a shitty communications degree and enter the job market with PTSD 5 years after all of your peers, you do an untold amount of violence all around the globe. And then you're permanently scarred and broken as a consequence of that. If you recognize that and then actively work to undermine it for future generations, then you're good in my book, because at the end of the day, that's just how people operate.
And end your system.
You're literally so stupid. Turkey's military is not that advanced. That's racist. You're literally defending genocide. What is Syria deal? Were you born in US or Turkey? You're literally so stupid. Wait, what? How am I defending genocide? Turkey has mandatory army enrollment? Yes, it does. Turkey's military is not that advanced. Second largest military in NATO. Second largest standing military in NATO. Utilizing U.S. weapons doesn't mean it's advanced. Okay, brother or sister. Seemingly good enough. All right, let's continue with
of apartheid, and one genocide is enough. We don't need another one. Then yes, we can see a future of peace. It all starts with one specific act: ending the Israeli illegal occupation of Palestinian land.
So it's interesting that Gershom Baskin thought it was Donald Trump saying all hell will break loose if the hostages aren't released was aimed actually at Netanyahu and not so much at Hamas, or the Palestinians. Do you think that Trump is good for you?
Dem Socia, Hassan Abi brother, Ahmed al-Shara is different using the new name. His most recent interview showed a clear shift from his past, and now he has a nation-building mindset. If you say so.
Your cause or bad for your cause?
Look, all I'm saying is only time will tell, okay? I don't think, getting a haircut and putting on a suit and tie automatically makes you, it might make you aesthetically appealing to Western sensibilities, but I don't think it changes what you are interested in doing. Syria is, at the end of the day, a very diverse country. And as far as I understand, HTS's regional operations in the past, regional governance initiatives in the past were less than desirable, let's say. Also, the crimes that we are reforming for in this process are crazy. Like, when you think about it, the crimes that you're reforming for that we're talking about are like beheading people. You know what I mean? It's not like I don't know, call me crazy, but I feel like maybe this is my least woke opinion, but I feel like once you're in ISIS territory or once you're in Al-Qaeda territory, like when you have risen through the ranks of Al-Qaeda, I feel like that's a bridge too far for me. Like, now you're in like serial killer territory. You know what I mean? I don't know. Am I not woke enough for this? Am I crazy? Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. Like, yeah, sure, he looks like Zelensky now, but like, I'm not going to be, ready to accept the premise that he's a changed man. That's why I say only time will tell, which I think is like that's a pretty understandable thing to say, right? IDF that has literally killed hundreds of thousands of people is better than off-brand Al-Qaeda, Lamau. When did I say that? So pro-reform of Nazis. Oh, are you saying that I'm not in favor of like reforming HTS? Yeah, if, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow turned around and was like, oh, don't worry, I've actually gotten woke, like I'm gonna let the Palestinians breathe or whatever, I wouldn't be inclined to believe him either. If you're talking about like some random dude that rose up in arms or whatever, that's my man. You're talking about like, you're talking about reform when you're comparing a commander of Al-Qaeda. It's like saying, I don't know, like Moshe Dayan was reformed later in his life or something. You know what I mean? It's like, nah, he wasn't. No, still a terrorist, still a war criminal, It doesn't matter if he got government positions. Like, there's a difference between, a random guy who was conscripted and then was like, this was inhumane, I can't believe it, I'm going to join Breaking the Silence now, you know what I mean? Versus Moshe Dayan or Benjamin Netanyahu. He was number 4 in Al-Qaeda after Bin Laden, Zawahiri, and Zarqawi. Then he was number 2 in ISIS after Baghdadi, but now he's finally realized his dream of being number 1 in Syria. Listen, stop. People have he read Darin Acemoglu, Why Nations Fail, and that book changed his life. A good book can change one's life.
Pause.
Yeah, all you're telling me is he has leadership experience.
It depends on his behavior. I mean, it depends on whether he will allow Israel to annex the West Bank, for instance, which would kill completely the possibility of a Palestinian state. It depends if at this very moment he did something positive, which is to pressure Netanyahu, something that Biden couldn't do. And only because there is a pressure from Trump on Netanyahu.
Bro, you want Assad to stay in power? Just admit it. Assad is literally worse, bro. That's like about HGS is a better player now. Assad's literally worse. And where proof Azan he chopped people's heads off? Where proof he chopped someone's heads off? Dog, we are talking about an Al-Qaeda commander. What are you talking about? Are we now whitewashing Al-Qaeda? What is happening in this chat? What is happening in this chat? What's going on right now? Yo, the well of depravity is endless for liberals. I swear to God. My man's hitting the... Dude, Al-Qaeda is not that bad. What? It's almost always like people who are seriously Islamophobic too. So that's what's crazy about it. Is like dudes will just forget about Islamophobia when it comes to American State Department interests, which is crazy. Like they become so woke. It's so funny watching NATO liberals turn into like the Londonistan Salafists all of a sudden out of nowhere, where they're like, Inshallah, my brothers, if your lady is breathing the air, she's no longer your lady. After all, there's other men out there also breathing the same air, bruv. She must stay in the house. Another man's penis, astaghfirullah, has been in that air at some point. Some of Al-Qaeda's old tweets have resurfaced. ... It's not looking too good. NATO liberals will be like, every child born on the other side of the Gaza security perimeter has the likelihood of becoming a rugged Hamas terrorist and must be eviscerated with the best weapons possible, and then turn around and be like, there is nothing wrong with being a Salafist and beheading a couple people. What's wrong with you? Okay. This man is reformed. You're being quite Islamophobic, sweetie.
That we are seeing this deal happening. This deal was there 6 months ago. The Palestinian side had accepted the deal. Netanyahu blocked it. Biden, instead of blaming Netanyahu, lied and claimed that it was the Palestinians who blocked the deal. And we lost in the course of the last 6 months 10,000 Palestinian innocent people.
Yeah.
And in that course, he also allowed the killing of many Israeli prisoners. So in reality, we are seeing now a difference, mainly because now Netanyahu understands he cannot play games with Trump. And that means there is an opportunity. We never accept ethnic cleansing, and we will never accept to be subjugated to apartheid.
Got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Mustafa Bagout
and Alan Fisher.
This is actually a fantastic new thing that the Brandon administration did on its way out. The U.S. has announced the lifting of the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terror. What a laughable thing that existed already, for the record. What a laughable thing. I mean, it's not even laughable, actually. It's incredibly cruel and horrifying. Now, of course, he did this, but Donald Trump, I'm sure, will immediately undo this in the next 6 days.
He's live for us in Washington, D.C. So, first of all, just explain to us why Biden is removing Cuba from this list of state sponsors of terrorism now.
Well, this is something that's been under examination since essentially the Biden administration took over in the White House. Donald Trump changed the designation as he was going out the door, in fact, on the 12th of January 2021. And the Biden administration criticised them for it, saying that essentially they were tying their hands for a while. Now, they said they would undergo a review. They've done that. In 2022, Antony Blinken said that was still underway. And here we are, almost 3 years later, and they said that's now done and they're removing the designation. So what does it mean? It means that Cuba is removed from the list that also includes North Korea, Syria.
We've done more terrorism to Cuba than Cuba has ever done to anybody. I mean, yeah, it's not even a question. That literally is not even remotely a question. The fact that we have a designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terror is further terror upon Cuba. It is one of the ways in which we have continuously defended this inhumane blockade implemented for the crime of having a revolution against a brutal fascist dictator, that happened to, be backed by the American government.
And Iran. It means that humanitarian organizations, church groups, and various human rights organizations can now move aid to help the people in Cuba without facing any sort of US sanctions. It also means that a number of political prisoners are going to be released by the Cuban government. That whole operation is going to be overseen by the Catholic Church.
I will tell you something. I will tell you something more about before we move on from the Palestine stuff. If this ceasefire is implemented, and I really, really hope it is, okay, you are going to see a lot more Americans recognize the full severity of Israel's cruelty in Gaza. It's going to be shocking for you because you've been here this whole time. So you see it. You've seen it. You've seen it every day. So for you, you understand it. But even for many of you, there will be new revelations if international human rights organizations are allowed to go in and conduct investigations to try to even tackle the full severity of Israel's violence. You'll start seeing mainstream outlets report on it a little bit differently, okay? And they already have. That's why you saw the MSNBC coverage with Chris Hayes, who has... he's always been a better voice than the rest of the rest of the MSNBC anchors in general. But also, you saw the 60 Minutes reporting on it, and even the New York Times is engaging in a little bit of ass covering. Okay, death toll in Gaza likely 40% higher than reported, researchers say. More than 64,000 Palestinians may be killed by traumatic injury in the first 9 months of the war in Gaza, according to a new study. The peer-reviewed statistical analysis led by epidemiologists at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine used modeling in an effort to provide an objective third-party estimate of the casualties. The UN has relied on the figure from the Hamas-led Ministry of Health, which it says has been largely accurate, but the new study suggests that Hamas Health Ministry tally is a significant undercount. The estimate in the analysis corresponds to the 2.9% of Gaza's pre-war population having been killed by traumatic injury, or 1 in 35 inhabitants. The analysis did not account for other war-related casualties such as death from malnutrition. The 46,000 number coming from the Hamas Health Ministry is a very specific number. It is most likely an undercount. Previous estimates have always shown that the Palestinian Health Ministry, the Palestinian Health Ministry always undercounts, It's usually an undercount. It's the closest you can get to the truth, but it's usually always an undercount. Now, the real number of deaths are far larger than that. Death because you don't have access to medicine because your hospital exploded. Deaths because deaths that lead to being in warlike conditions. Deaths through famine. Deaths through dehydration. Deaths through numerous other ways in which Israel's siege has caused deaths in the Gaza Strip are not counted in this number. The Palestinian-run health ministry's numbers, 46,000. Are very specific. Death by Israeli bullets and Israeli rockets. This does not count hypothermia, pneumonia, death by disease, and the like. Poisonings by contaminated food, not having access to medical equipment. Those numbers are not counted in these direct numbers. This London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine is saying that even the deaths caused directly by gunshots and directly by Israeli bullets and directly by Israeli ammunition and munitions is still an undercount, and that death number is probably around 64,000. The Lancet study and its estimations are significantly higher than the Palestinian Health Ministry's numbers for that reason, because historically, direct munition deaths, traumatic injury due to war-related, due to Israel's direct bombing campaigns, those are always going to be much lower than the much larger number of deaths that happen due to The war-related casualties such as deaths from malnutrition, waterborne illness, or the breakdown of the health system as the conflict has progressed. Yes, Lancet uses excess deaths as their metric, which gets a much better picture, much like the COVID excess death numbers, getting us a better picture of COVID deaths. Exactly. I've already interviewed Bernie Sanders. But let's get back to Cuba.
It includes what we're told is a significant number of people, including those who were involved in the so-called food protests in 2021. Now, this is also political, because Joe Biden knows that when the Trump administration comes back to the White House, there are a number of Cuba hardliners there, not least Marco Rubio, a Florida senator who is earmarked to be the next Secretary of State and has spoken out many, many times about the situation in Cuba. So could this be easily flipped? Well, it's not completely easy to do, but certainly Donald Trump could make a number of executive orders in the first couple of days that would effectively nullify what Joe Biden has done. But it's interesting that the Biden campaign and the Biden team criticized Donald Trump doing this on his way out the door. And here Joe Biden has done exactly the same with just 6 days left in the White House.
And just to be clear, this doesn't have any impact on the economic embargo that's been on Cuba since the 1960s, does it?
Well, essentially, if you're designated a state supporter of terrorism, it means that you can't get arms sales. That was never going to happen. It also means that some things designated as dual use could actually make its way through to Cuba without the company providing them getting sanctions. But the biggest plus, of course, is the aid. That means that groups can send aid to Cuba. It can help the people who are living there and make things slightly easier, because we know that certainly Cuba has been struggling over the last few years. Remember, it was
dual use, by the way. Remember dual use? Americans that are even anti-Israel will often understand what that means when Israel does it to the Palestinians, but won't understand it when America does it, when we do it to Cuba.
It was back in the 1980s that Cuba was initially designated as a state sponsor of terrorism. That was changed by Barack Obama in 2017, flipped again by Donald Trump, flipped now by Joe Biden. Watch this space about what happens in the next couple of weeks.
You noted there that Biden left it to the last days of his presidency to do this. Many thought that he would do it in the first few days of his presidency. Do we know why there was such a time lag?
Well, they wanted to make sure that all the criteria for changing the designation were met. Now, there's no reason why it's taken 4 years. Certainly, as I said, Antony Blinken in 2022 was looking and saying that they were about to change it. It was possibly going to happen. Why the whole process is taking quite so long, no one is. But given that just a week ago, Joe Biden changed the designation of the ability of oil companies to drill offshore in America, this is yet another attempt by Joe Biden, as often happens when presidents are handing over to a president of another party, essentially trying to tie him to some of the policies that are already in place and making things difficult if he wants to change things.
Yeah, good stuff. Giving Cuba 6 full days of freedom until very quickly this designation changes back. 6 days, chat. Like I said, you could have done this for the past 4 years, not even a full week.